by talking about the future of shows like your show. And I think I only mean that in the sense of show like your show, because it's so singular. There's not a lot like it. And it's really a remarkable little island where people talk in civil ways. It's not about the obligatory left-right shrieking. People are given an enormous amount of time to develop ideas. It just doesn't sound like much of what passes for talk shows anymore. And I guess I want to ask you, and I know this is a bit of a trick question, but in light of what your show has done for so long and continues to do, and the sort of dissolution of a lot of the media around it into really ugly, shrieking shows, do you despair for the future of the media, of shows like your show, or do you feel like this is a blip, we're going to course correct, and we'll talk civilly to each other again someday?
I really don't despair for the future because of you, because I honestly believe that people are hungering for more honest, straightforward, civil conversation which informs rather than implies. There is so much implication in terms of what passes for news and talk these days, and along with the implication comes downright opinion, and I think you all want to make up your own minds. I think that if you hear various good and thoughtful opinions, you will do more of the study on your own, and you will find out not only what you really think, but how you ought to decide and go forward. And I think the growth of our tiny little show, which started out on the campus of the American University in a little Quonset hut, and it went off the air when you went off the curb. And I took it over in 1979 after I had been a volunteer for a number of years, and actually a volunteer for 10 months and a part-time employee for 2 years. Then I went off to do other things. When I took the show, it was intended for women in the home, because that's where most of us were at the time. And then I quickly got very bored and said to my boss, the world is a big place, and women and men, whether they're in the home or in the workplace, feel very strongly about these issues, and I think we need to deal with them. So, whether in fact tomorrow is my 77th birthday. Thank you. And maybe or maybe not, in honor of that birthday, NPR and WAMU have just signed a new 3-year contract. At least for a little while, this program will continue, but I have the feeling that people have gotten awfully weary of the screaming, awfully tired of the non-information information. I really do. I see someone in this audience, and I have to tell you, just before I left for Spain a few weeks ago, my very dearest, beloved friend in high school had died. I talked to her 3 days before she died, And I think her daughter, Kat, is here in the audience. Kat, would you stand, please? Her son, Corrigan, of whom Lynn was so proud, is here at the University of Virginia. Hi, Corrigan. So it's really lovely to be here. Kat, is your husband here as well? You ought to stand up too. Come on. There you are. So it's been a year of tough stuff, and I know all of you have gone through tough stuff. My husband has Parkinson's. He's had it for 5 years. And last year he began falling in our apartment, and I could not lift him anymore. So he and I agreed that on the 6th of November we would move him to assisted living. We will have been married 54 years in December. And on Christmas Day of that same year, my dearest friend of 45 years died in her sleep. It's been one hell of a year. So I'm glad to be here with you, who I think, indeed, I know, enjoy the program and have come tonight because you support this wonderful school and support what we do as well. So I thank you.
No, it was a superb answer, and actually segues flawlessly into my next question. Because one of the things that's really remarkable about you, I think, as a public figure, is how openly you've spoken about your health, your family, your struggles as a child, and that's really difficult, I think, in this profession. And I was reading this morning from your book, and I thought, you know, I remember writing about a miscarriage and having one of my mentors say, "Oh, don't ever write about your health or anything personal, because people will forever associate you as less than your professional self." And I ignored them and wrote about it, and it was rewarding. But I wanted to ask you, did you get that kind of pushback? Did you feel that in yourself, that these are things that somehow would detract from, you know, the perfect patina? What helped you kind of be open as you are, about your struggles, about the illness, about your childhood? What was the impetus?
I've never had a perfect patina. Ever. So that I think that there are a lot of people with whom I identify, and perhaps because of their own struggles, which may be totally different from my own, have struggled as well. We are members of a group called humanity, and we each have our own struggles. And why not share them? Why not confess that we had a tough time? Why not be open with each other? You know, as a matter of fact, when I went off the air for 4 months in 1998, having finally been diagnosed with something called spasmodic dysphonia, where the vocal cords clench up and there is no cause, no known cause. There is no cure, and every 6 months or so I get an injection into the vocal cords of Botox to paralyze the vocal cords so that they are then wide open and then slowly, slowly come back together again and begin to vibrate normally. Otherwise, I'd be going all the time. Spasmodic dysphonia is a disorder not only of initiation, but of continued smooth speech. I try to have the injections shortly before I'm scheduled to take a vacation, as I did this time. I flew out to Portland, Oregon, where my Johns Hopkins doctor has unfortunately moved. Had my injection, and believe me, I've tried a lot of doctors who are close by, and it's been disastrous. So I fly out there once every 4, 5, 6 months, get my injection, and then I have to be off the air for a few weeks because the voice has not come back together. Now, if you didn't know that, you'd think, how come this woman takes so many vacations? So it's better that you know that. It's also better that you know that figures like myself, whom you hear on the air or see on the screen or whatever, have not come from perfectly charming, deliciously beautiful backgrounds. I mean, people have had far tougher times than I did. I concluded that book feeling such sympathy and such understanding for my mother and my father. My father came here first in 1907 from Beirut, Lebanon. He went back to the old country in 1929 to Alexandria, Egypt, where my mother's family was then living, and plucked her from another man to whom she was engaged and brought her here to this country without any of her family, whereas he came to this country with his 4 sisters and 3 brothers, all of whom were my aunts and uncles in this huge Washington Arab community that I called home. It was not easy, and yet it was wonderful. So, I mean, I think that's pretty much the way everybody's life is. Our second book had to do with John's and my marriage, and any married couple in here knows it ain't easy. You work at it. You work at it. You work at it. You think it's fine for one day or 1 week, and then it's downhill for the next 3 weeks. I think people ought to talk about those things. And if they did, they'd probably be a lot more comfortable. Long answer.
No, it was a good answer. And I would just add that years ago, I was at some retreat for divorce attorneys. Don't ask why I was speaking there. And someone came up to me who has your illness and said to me, it changed his life having you. I mean, this is a prominent divorce attorney. Having somebody modeling being open and dealing with it and, you know, all whatever stigma he had attached to it. So I think, you know, the other piece of this is you have no notion of how it impacts people who hear and say, oh, it's not only that there's no patina, it's that I have some of this stuff too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm going to ask one more question because I want to take audience questions. And it is, so I've got a bit of a ringer because John Dickerson, who frequently does your Friday news show, is a good friend. So I asked him what I should ask
and
you.
his half-sister lives in the same apartment building as I.
Okay.
So it's a very incestuous world.
We're all humans. And John said, ask Diane Rehm if she knows how terrified her guests on the Friday News Roundup really are. And he said to let you know that you're called in. I mean, these are, you know this, right? The best journalists in the business, each of whom has written, this seminal piece on whatever the issue is of the week. And John says they stagger in with these tabbed binders, and they're so scared because they know. And John, I should add, never sweats. But he said he staggers in and he has no idea what's coming. And he thinks he's going to talk about the debt ceiling, but you're asking him about agricultural derivatives, and he's like, it's not in my binder. So I guess the question, that was a long way of saying, how do you prepare? If they can't prepare and they wrote the stuff, how do you prepare?
I have a much easier job. I'm there to ask the questions. What we do on the Friday News Roundup, and by the way, John Dickerson is one of the best prepared, best articulated journalists out there. He's always ready. What we do to prepare for the Friday News Roundup is that all 8 of us, 5 full-time producers, 2 part-time producers, and I sit down on Thursday morning and we look at the week's top stories, and we choose from those, because you could choose 100 different stories. John would have a heart attack, God forbid. And we choose the ones that we think you are most interested in, want to know about the most. We do 2 hours. The first is on domestic stories, of which John Dickerson is a part, and the second are international stories, an hour to which we would not invite John because he's dealing with national stories. Then what the producers do while I am on the air for 2 hours on Thursday is divide up all those stories, the national and the international. And they are preparing briefs for me on each of those stories. So I go in there knowing exactly what I want from these journalists. Oh, and by the way, we do send each of the journalists the list of topics, so he's not telling me the truth. The list of topics the day before, so they know what to prepare for. But as John rightly points out, if you spent the whole week looking at this budget shortfall or the fiscal cliff or Obamacare, and you've been writing about that all week, and you've got now to come on the Diane Rehm show, you've got to prepare yourself. They do their research. We do not pay them one single dime. And we had 6 different journalists every week, 3 for the domestic hour, 3 for the international hour, and they are superbly prepared. So tell John I'll give him a big hug next time I see him.
I think you should just give him a bigger binder. So I want to take questions, and I am going to offer the obligatory admonition to please form your question in the form of a question, and try to be as brief as you possibly can. And I think, how are we going to do this?
He's got a robe
You've got a
and
mic, so maybe just sort of wave your hand if you have a question for Ms. Rehm, and he'll bring the mic to you.
Here comes one.
You've spoken about the programs and how you put them together, but I've always been interested in a new topic that suddenly comes up that you need to get some people on, bring in. I want to know how the people supporting you, the people out there, pick up the telephone and call Senator so-and-so, or call this person or that person, and the right people are always there. Is it simply the call, this is a call from Diane Rehm when you were here? How is this done backstage to prepare for you don't have a long term period sometimes?
Well, certainly some of it is because we have such fine producers who know, each of whom has knowledge of who the right people are to call. And certainly the opportunity to speak with 2.5 million plus, because what that 2.5 million figure doesn't count is the around the world exposure. We're on the air in every single country around the world. By virtue of online, via computer, we get calls from Beijing, we get calls from Saudi Arabia, we get calls from anywhere you want to think of, we get calls. And thirdly, I think that those people also understand we are not a right-left kind of program, and there's not going to be that battle. And I am inviting you on to express your honest opinion. I'm not inviting you on to slam you. So I think that's pretty much the answer. They do know what the show is, and they are willing and interested to get their own point of view across. Hope that answers it.
Thank you so much for being here. I listen to your show often, and I'm just wondering how every day you come up with such an interesting subject and topic. And I wonder if you would share with us how you choose these topics and the people that are on the show.
It's a great question. Thank you. Every morning I get there at about 8:15. I'm up at 5 each morning. I go through 3 newspapers: Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. And when I say I go through them, I really go through them. I get to the office about 8:15. Everybody else is already there. They've all begun to talk among themselves. We go around the room. Each person puts forth a topic or 2 or 3 that they think deserves the first hour the next day. Understand, we're operating 24 hours ahead, and that's it. The choices may be many, or they may be pretty much narrowed. I talked to my producers this morning. Before I left, there were 3 ideas that rose to the top. The Pope, his changing language, the fight on the Hill about the fiscal cliff, and finally, food stamps and the House decision to cut millions of dollars from that program. And I said, I think we ought to do food stamps. Because I think people around the world ought to know, number one, who's going to be cut, number two, how much these people earn, number three, what jobs they do or do not have, number four, how it will affect the people whose food stamps are going to be cut, and number five, why are we cutting food stamps? Why? I don't get it. So that's pretty much how it happens every single day. Then, with rotation, and a very systematic rotation among the producers, one woman, and I should tell you that all 7, and including myself, are 8, are women. We have at times employed men, and they've been great producers. They've gone on to do other things. We always open the interview process when a man is interested in working in this nest of females. So that one woman takes charge. She begins calling. First, she's got to begin reading, and then she begins calling. She may make 20 telephone calls before she's got the first guest. From there, she's got to find somebody who has a different point of view. Not someone who's going to scream, but someone who has a reasonable, rational view as to why these food stamp funds are being cut. And then third, we like to have a journalist in there who will talk about the politics and who it is and why it is and where the White House is and so on. I then, on the next day, because that producer does not finish her script until probably the next morning when I walked in, I sit down at 8:45 and start reading. At 9:15, I go into the studio and pre-record the billboard, the intro, and the promos for the next day. And then I go back to my desk and continue reading. And then I'm ready to do the show. And it's a very grand process. It's wonderfully exciting because I'm learning something brand new every single day. My blood pressure goes up every single day because Washington is a mess. Truly a mess. And you know, what happened today is one more indication thereof. Overwhelming voting against the president's health care plan for the 42nd or 43rd time, a threat to shut down the government, which honestly I don't think is going to go anywhere this time. That's my personal opinion. But it's a mess. So, one day.
We can take one more, if as quick can be, because I really promised Ms. Rehm that
should take 2 more.
Oh, you want to take 2? Oh, she's a star. We're going to take 2 more. So.
Thank you for being here. As you step back and look at your career and look at today, what makes you the most optimistic and the most pessimistic about the state of the country?
I think the thing that makes me the most optimistic is my belief that the majority of American people are good and decent, peace-loving, grounded people in the sense of a democratic way of governing and of living. They work well with each other, they respect each other, they work well with their neighbors, they care about their children, they care about what's happening in the world. The thing that makes me most pessimistic is the growth of violence in this country. And the concern, I don't know if you heard the interview I did with Margaret Atwood the other day, which focused on her futuristic, speculative ideas about what the world is coming to. And that coincided with the Centers for Disease Control's release of a report that bacteria are rising in such rapidity without the creation of antibiotics to confront them. I really worry about the kind of plague that Margaret Atwood writes about. And she talked about the fact that plagues had wiped out most of humanity in the past, but small kernels of human beings had continued to exist and then continued to flourish and then have been wiped out again. I worry that corporations have too much money. I worry that people at the lower end of the economy don't have enough to have a decent living. I worry about a lot of things.
We can take one more.
Last question.
One more.
Right there.
Right. Okay.
I was curious about how public figures that you speak with are affected as their level of prominence, public prominence, rises. So in other words, if you were to interview the same person maybe early in their career, if they're a youth senator, for example, and then later, do you find that they're more or less inhibited as they become more broadly known? Are they more forthcoming if they feel like they have an established platform and they have a certain public gravitas? Or do you find that they're more inhibited because they feel like anything that they say is so scrutinized and can be held against them?
I think it has more to do with the latter than the former. I think as people rise to prominence, I'll give you an example. John McCain knew I did not agree with him on the Iraq War. He knew that, yet he was willing to come into the studio and be totally forthright about his view as to why we should go into Iraq. He said to me at the end of the program, Diane, I know you don't agree with me, but I thank you for having me on. He is a guy who says what he believes. On the other hand, I'm going to find it hard in my heart to ever forgive General Colin Powell. Ever. If he came on the program after his tenure as Secretary of State was over, and after his statements at the United Nations, and I said to him, I wonder to whom you, as a general and as Secretary of State, took your oath. And he said, as a general and as Secretary of State, I took my oath to the President of the United States. And I said, what about the American people? Could you stand at the United Nations knowing what you knew? What might have happened after you said to President Bush, Mr. President, if you go there, if you go into Iraq, you own it? What would have happened if you had said, Mr. President, I understand your point of view, but I, as a general, do not see the evidence, and I therefore resign. I do not believe we would have gone to war in Iraq if General Colin Powell had resigned. And he got it. You know, as he walked in the door, he put his arms around me, because we've known each other for many years, put his arm around me, said, oh, Diane, so good to see you again. At the end of the interview, he walked out without saying goodbye. You know, I felt it was my responsibility to ask the question that had been on everybody's mind, and which was on everybody's mind. What did you know?
So I guess I want to, first of all, I want to say thank you. I know you'd rather be home with soup and a comforter, but
and my puppy.
And your puppy.
But I've loved it.
Thank
you. Thank you so much.
A package, a thank you gift for you coming, and we tried to put a package together that represented your many, many eclectic interests. But this isn't part of that package. This is a birthday gift. And we hope you appreciate it. Everybody, I think almost everybody in this town, when you hear the name George Garrett, you'll appreciate that unfortunately, he's no longer with us, but he was a giant in the literary world. He was a giant to all of us in this community. And we have this wonderful broadside, which I never even knew what a broadside was until we put this event together. But one of George's poems, Luck's Shining Child, and it was signed by George, obviously, before he passed away. And this is just a very special birthday gift from Charlottesville to you.
Oh,
thank you so much.